Where should mortgage rates be? That's a tough question. They're never going to be at 3% again. And so anybody who says, oh, well, I'm waiting for them to go back to 3, forget it. You'll be waiting forever.
Let's be honest, the housing market is a little weird right now, right? So what does that mean for someone who's looking to buy a house, sell one, or even hold on to their home? My guest today is Diana Olick, CNBC's real estate correspondent and one of the most trusted voices in housing journalism. She's covered the boom, the bust, and everything in between. And she's with us today to help make sense of the market that most home buyers and sellers are trying to navigate. Welcome back to Own It. I'm Angie Hicks, co-founder of Angi. This is where we talk about what it takes to own your home without it owning you. In today's episode, why the housing market is so weird right now, what new homeowners are up against, and what those homeowners who come out ahead are really thinking. Let's get into my conversation with Diana Olick. Well, Diana, I'm thrilled to have you as a part of the show. I've been looking forward to recording this episode. There is so much information out there about the market. As a homeowner, it's sometimes just hard to make heads or tails of what's going on. Buying a home is such a big financial decision. It's a big emotional decision. And when you're starting to layer in kind of how the economy is impacting it, it can seem pretty overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, more so now than ever, I think.
But then there's also the longer tail and kind of stepping back, looking more broadly at the market, which I think can be important too. I'd love to just get some of your perspective here. So you cover the market every single day. For a homeowner who's trying to make sense of it, what is actually happening right now?
Things are really weird right now. It's just, and that is my high level journalistic take on it. We just had a lot of strange dynamics coming into this spring season. I could take it all the way back to, the Great Recession. We have had this chronic underbuilding ever since we had, remember the foreclosure crisis, the subprime mortgage crisis, and the home builders all, lost huge market share. It was just a major catastrophe in the industry, and builders just stopped building for a while, right? So you had all this supply on the market, and then builders were, at 30% of what they normally would build every year. And that just continued and continued and continued. And then they started slowly ramping up, in the last 10 years, they've been coming back. But believe it or not, builders are still not at the level of where they should be given demand. And there's a lot of different estimates, tons of different estimates, but I'll go with one that says we need 4 million more homes in the U.S. in order to meet their current demand. So we're 4 million homes short. We're just underbuilt by a lot, whether it's multifamily or it's single family. And what that means is that prices have just continued to go higher. Now, we saw this massive boom during COVID. Everybody was buying a house, right? Mortgage rates went down to 3%. You could buy a home for nothing, really, which pushed mortgage rates up because, we always say you don't buy the house, you buy the monthly payment. And the monthly payment was so much lower because of that 3% interest rate that people are just snapping up homes, moving from big cities out into everywhere, going south, et cetera. Prices went up dramatically. And they still haven't come off that. We are still not seeing some markets, some overheated markets are seeing prices come down a little bit, but we're not seeing it nationally. And that's again because of that chronic undersupply. We still don't have as many homes for sale as we did in 2019. And that's with, the market slowing down because interest rates are now more than twice what they were during COVID.
When you think about that, where do you see that hitting kind of buyers the worst? Is there a group of buyers that are getting kind of left out in the cold here?
First-time buyers. First-time buyers are really the hardest. And you've seen, some of the data show that first-time buyers are now 40 years old, the oldest they've ever been. And that's because the pandemic kind of pushed that back. And also because housing just got so expensive. They just couldn't come up with the down payments. But again, I got to go back to that supply. The supply on the low end of the market is also the lowest. There's much more supply available in the, say, 750,000 to over 1 million range. And that's why you're seeing the high end of the market trade so much more. There's just more stock available to buy.
Do you also feel, because one of the things, the dynamics I've been thinking about lately as well is just the fact that, the silent generation, the retirees are living in their houses longer, and they actually compete for the same houses as the new home buyers, right? They're thinking about hey, I want that 2 or 3 bedroom ranch potentially versus, a 2-story, 4-bedroom house.
Yeah, it's because the math doesn't work anymore for the downsizing baby boomers. I mean, we will see more of them start to sell, and we are slowly seeing that. But what happened was that mortgage rate lock-in effect. So if you had a rate that, I will say right now, I have 2.75%.
You don't want to trade it.
Yeah, I don't want to trade that. My kids are grown. They're out of the house. I'm living in a house that I don't really need that much space. But if I were to trade for a smaller house, which would be cheaper to buy, but I'd still have, a much, not necessarily a higher payment, but I would have an inflated payment because I'd be trading 2.5% for 6.75 on whatever I buy. Even if I want to buy, a small condo or something like that, it just, in my mind, why should I get rid of this very small monthly payment that I have, and I have all this space in my house? I don't need it, but, it just doesn't make financial sense. And that's what's happening to a lot of people my age.
I think about the same thing. It's like, the people, when you see people that are like, a lot of times kind of post kids graduating, moving out, things like that, you see people tend to downsize houses.
Right. And you get targeted.
They're not.
What's so interesting now is that AI knows when your kids graduate and everything. And so you immediately get these emails from real estate agents going, thinking about moving? And they're like, oh, you know that my daughter just left, don't you?
Yeah.
I wonder if they have those Google cars that drive around and they see people coming out with their bags and their boxes and stuff. They're like, kid alert, downsize alert.
Come and only take part of the house stuff, right? If you just kind of step back and think about interest rates in general and kind of remove your initial situation, what is a good interest rate?
When I bought my first house, my dad helped me get a mortgage, and he got 8.5% on a 10-year ARM, and he was like, I got the best deal for you. And I was like, woohoo, 8.5%. So,
well, to him, it was the best deal because when he was in his first house.
Right. So look, where should mortgage rates be? That's a tough question. We went from 5.99% the day before the war with Iran began to now, we were at 6.75% according to Mortgage News Daily. We saw this spike in mortgage rates, which combines with people being concerned about the overall economy. Consumer sentiment is dropping. You've got high gas prices. You've got high prices for food. You add in, even if, a 75 basis point jump in mortgage rates doesn't seem like a lot. If you translate it, it's about, $125 on a monthly payment for the median priced home. If you're putting 20% down, we did that math. So should mortgage rates, they're never going to be at 3% again. And so anybody who says, oh, well, I'm waiting for them to go back to 3, forget it. You'll be waiting forever. Should they be more around 5% range? 5% could be healthier. 4%. The problem is when mortgage rates get really low, more people get in, causing more demand, and back to that supply issue, it pushes prices higher. So it's really that balance between supply, demand, prices, and interest rates. So, in my view, I think a 5% handle on a rate would be great to bring buyers back in to help affordability. But we really just need more supply. The more supply we have on the market, the better you're going to see pricing. You're not going to have 7 offers for that house. God, a house across the street from me, and we're now, in this higher rated environment. It was a couple of weeks ago, a house across the street from me went on sale, and in 4 days they had 7 offers, 6 of them all cash, and it went for significantly over asking, simply because there's nothing I live in Washington, D.C., there was nothing on the market.
I think a lot of people right now who are trying to get in the market, are trying to make too quick a decisions too, because the market is the way it is, right? They're, if they're competing with 6 other people, they're rushing in and maybe not, kind of thinking about, is this really the house I want? Is this the house I need, for a while? Because I've had this perspective that, the starter house may not exist anymore. So you need to think about it, because we've done some research that says people are living in their houses about 5 years longer than they anticipated, which makes sense with the environment that we're in, so it changes your time horizon. So when you're out looking for a house, you need to think about what your house, what your life looks like 10 years down the road, not just 3 years down the road. And will this house work for me then?
And that affects your mortgage choice. Yeah. Because I say to people, like, a 10-year ARM is a great mortgage vehicle. Everybody says, oh, what's the rate on the 30-year fixed? Well, who's going to really be in their house, especially if it's your first house? You're not going to be in that house for 30 years. You're going to have kids. You're going to need more space. You're going to want to move out maybe further out into the burbs, better schools, whatever. So I think the 10-year ARM, which generally has a significantly lower interest rate and is protected for 10 years, your rate will not change. You can always refinance if rates go lower. There's that 75 basis point rule that if you can save 75 basis points on your mortgage, it's worth the cost of that refinance. So, so I always say that. But I also say, look, there's no such thing as a perfect home. You know, the house you buy, the house you grow into, the house you fix up and adore, whatever, that's your perfect home. If it's not perfect, you're going to move on anyway. So there's people who get into the bidding wars and they're like, oh my God, I have to have this house. It's the only house that'll work for us. I mean, it's great for the seller. Don't get me wrong, but you just got to be careful getting into that mindset, because you have to look at, you know, you don't want to be house poor. And you always, there's this thing that it's not perfect, it is perfect, but it is your single largest investment for most people. And that makes it even more emotional.
Go a little different direction here. You know, so if the average new homeowner or first-time homeowner today is nearly 40 years old, you know, what should we be telling young people today?
Look, I think it's person to person. When we say the average age is 40, that means half are below and half are above, you know. So there are younger people buying homes. A home is a great investment vehicle. Prices tend to generally go up, but in general, across the country, housing appreciates. It is a good investment vehicle. It also depends on, do you want to move cities? Do you want to be mobile? Do you want to have that flexibility? Which is why people want to rent more now, because, you know, rental apartments, the amenities are getting better. And then you do have that flexibility to move for your job, move for your family, move to, you know, go abroad for a couple of years and come back. The world it's kind of getting smaller, but getting bigger in its opportunities. And I don't think as many people want to just settle down in the hometown as much as they did, especially young people now. They want to be mobile. And so I think, how do I counsel young people? If the math works, if you do have the money to make that investment and you could get, you know, a pretty solid interest rate on your mortgage, and you do intend to be in the house for 5+ years, and it's a good school district, and that's where you want your kids to be when they're young and growing up. Look, for families, home ownership is a great, you know, opportunity to build wealth. And there are a lot of people who are being knocked out of that opportunity because they simply can't afford to get in on it when they're younger. And then the rents, you know, are higher as well. That eats up your ability to save for a down payment.
I think the point is there are lots of investment options.
Right.
And, you know,
historically, housing has been a good one. And the other thing is you get to live in the house, too. People forget that when they say, oh, am I going to make money back or whatever? You are actually living in the home and enjoying it and getting, you know, the benefits that home offers. Again, whether it's community, school district, fixing up the home, et cetera, to make even more money when you sell. Yeah. Which is your area, of course.
There's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot to, you know, peel back there. There's a lot of kind of opportunity there. You know, so, you've talked a lot about the fact that sometimes it's the market and kind of different cities. These are markets that people might not have considered before. And now you're seeing that they're attractive from a home buying perspective. You know, how should people factor that in to kind of where they decide to move in a world where, you know, our young people are probably more mobile?
Yeah. I mean, look, the Midwest is cheap. It has always been, and it still is, and it's much cheaper than, like, West Coast. That's going to be your least affordable markets. And New York City, of course, that I always say Manhattan is an island unto itself, because it is. The prices in the Northeast are really rough, and here in DC, they're pretty rough as well. But markets like, as you say, Cleveland, Columbus, Detroit is very up and coming. Pittsburgh, where some tech companies have actually moved into Pittsburgh because tech companies who had been in Silicon Valley were saying, you know, we can't get workers because they can't afford to live here. So we're going to open up a campus in Pittsburgh, and they have. And that's more affordable for people to live. You can get so much more house. I have friends who their son is buying a house in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And he's getting a 6-bedroom house for about, you know, $450,000 or $500,000. And I'm sitting here in DC going, a 6-bedroom house.
Yeah, I play that math game.
That's $3 million here.
Right.
So it depends. There are also markets that were formerly hot that are now cooling off. So when we talk about Austin, Texas is a big one. During COVID, you had a lot of people moving in. You also had this tech migration into Austin, and it simply overheated. And then with some of the back to work orders, back to office orders, and just the overpriced nature of it, Austin prices are now coming down.
Right.
So there are.
It seems like a lot of the warmer, the warmer cities that kind of got the bump, and Florida's the same. You got the bump from COVID, and now they're backing off a bit.
Yeah, so you're seeing those markets. I mean, they're still expensive, but they are coming down. But if you're looking, the middle of the country is the best place to find affordable housing.
You talked about the fact that it's like a weird market and there's so much noise in it right now. What should homeowners actually be paying attention to beyond just the rates? How should they be thinking about this?
Well, I think it depends market to market. You have to look at the inventory in the market and see, how competitive it's going to get. Is it the right time to go in now? Look, we're still at the kind of tail end of the spring market. And that's the most competitive market. Will there be even less inventory in the winter? Yes, there will. But some people like the fall, because the fall, it's not as many families. Families love to move in the spring because they can, they buy in the spring, they move over the summer, they want to do it before school starts, get everybody in and settled into the new school district or just into the new house. So, if you come in the fall, you might be able to be more competitive. And especially in December and January, again, there's not going to be much for sale, but what is not going to have a lot of competition for it. So that's a way you could look at it. Now, market to market, so timing is important. Knowing your market. You don't want to overpay. If you're in a market that is just really hot, and look, I can't even name the number of apps that are out there where you can look. You can see prices. You can see comparables. You can see, number of offers in some cases. You can see days on market. If a house has been sitting on the market for 80, 90 days in a hot market, there's something wrong with that house. So you should pay attention to things like that. Just look at the market dynamics that if you go on, I don't want to give everybody, but look, Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, all of them, there's a million. They give you a tremendous amount of information about what's going on, zip code to zip code. So just be well informed about going in, and also really look at your finances. Again, I go back to that being house poor. Look at what you shouldn't be spending on that monthly payment more than 35 to 40% of your income on that, because otherwise you're just going to be strapped. You're not going to feel like you can do anything, no vacations, no other expenses, like what if my car breaks down? You just don't want to be worried about that. Be smart about it, set a budget, and don't freak out if you go and see this amazing house you want and there's 5 offers and you're like, well, if we just do, 30,000 more or 40,000 more or 50, we could probably, well, don't. There will be there will be another house, and I know it's frustrating. We go out with, camera crews to open houses, and we talk to people all over the country. And we actually do a quarterly housing market survey on CNBC, and we talk to real estate agents just to see what's going on the ground. And there are some areas that you'll see a lot of foot traffic, a lot of buyer traffic. Recently, what they've been saying is there's a lot of traffic, but there's not a lot of people signing the deal because there's demand, but people are very nervous right now because the market is overheated still, price-wise, because interest rates are higher, and because of this general kind of scariness in the economy, what's happening with jobs, what's happening with prices, inflation, et cetera. We thought inflation was coming down. Maybe it's not.
Right. Yeah. If you want to stay at 35%, but the other stuff's getting more expensive, it starts to pinch the budget.
Exactly.
And I think your point about the budget is right. And you need to be super honest with yourself too. It's like you set that budget and then you almost need to back down a little bit, because inevitably when you're out in the market, your natural inclination is to kind of look like, well, what does an extra $20,000 buy me?
Yeah.
So starting a little bit lower so that you can still do a little bit of that creep probably makes, some good sense. That way you still feel like you're winning, right? You're like, hey, I'm being realistic of where I am.
Right. And you're going to end up making more on the house too. I mean, I'll just say personally, we did our first, my husband and I, when our kids were 1 and we had twins, we needed more space because we were in a tiny little row house. We bought a house for $10,000 less than we sold our previous house for. And it was a bigger house. It was further out from downtown. It had, the yard and everything, but it wasn't, the really big house that I liked, that I initially wanted, that was a couple $100,000 more, and which we could have scraped together to do. But in the end, we just felt more comfortable. We were able to, a couple of years down the road, pull out a little equity and put an addition on it to make, get that primary bathroom that we wanted so much. And it was fun doing an addition. It was fun, like, putting our own stamp on the house. And now, God, what is it, 23 years later, we have a huge amount of equity in this house. And that will serve us in retirement, going down the road. We just feel very comfortable. We've never worried about our monthly payment on our house because we just never overstretched.
You said something in the pre-interview that I really liked about you can live with a 1980s kitchen for 2 years. You might have more leverage than you think. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, you go into I remember I bought my first apartment in New York City. And that was the one that my dad helped me negotiate the mortgage on. And I was single, but I had a good job. I was working at CBS at the time, and I had moved back into Manhattan. And, I was looking around at sort of the 1 to 2 bedroom co-ops in Manhattan. And again, Manhattan is another animal. But my price range, I was very specific about it. And I walked into this one apartment, and I had gone into like 3 or 4 with the agent, and there were tons of people, and some of them were done up beautifully, and they had been renovated, and the competition was nuts. And then we go to this one apartment, and oh my God, there were like newspapers piled up on the floor. The kitchen was nasty. The bathroom wasn't great, but it was right in my budget.
Right.
There were no offers. It had been sitting there for a while. And what my mom, who was also in real estate, she was in real estate taxation, but what she always said to me is just, if you can see past the stuff and see the bones, that's what you're buying. Remember, all the stuff is coming out. So don't look at how somebody decorated it or what the kitchen looks like, because you can take it all out. And so I saw this, it had bay window, it had exposed brick with a fireplace. And I mean, this was awful. There was a plant with lights strung across it. I was just a nightmare as why they didn't stage it better.
Let me help you stage this.
Yes, exactly. It was awful. But I bought it. And when I moved into it, it was empty. Right. And I had it repainted. And a couple months later, it was a tiny kitchen. I just redid the cabinets and put in a new refrigerator. Nothing major.
Right.
And it was beautiful. That fresh coat of paint, those great stylistic. And then I, of course, got moved for my job literally 10 months later, and I sold it for $100,000 more.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in 10 months. So just look past the crap and see what's there, because you can get a great deal. And if you can live with the nasty kitchen, if it still works, and then you can renovate it when you have the money and the time to do it.
Right. And, and I think sometimes people get afraid of the word renovate in that it's a big investment. Sometimes, like you said, sometimes it can be. Sometimes you're literally taking the kitchen to the studs and you're redoing a kitchen.
Right.
But
I did that in this house too, in the house I live in now. I got my dream kitchen. I waited 6 years to do it. I waited 6 years to get it.
But sometimes, as you said, like if the cabinets are in good condition, but you don't like them, you can paint them. You could put new doors on them.
Right.
There's a lot of things that you can do that can really change the look and feel of a kitchen, without it being kind of that big, like, I'm doing a renovation, which I think sometimes people can find that to be a lot.
And because you can take the equity out of the house. We waited 6 years. We lived with the kitchen. There was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't my style. It wasn't my thing. I didn't love it. And then, we had the house reappraised, and there was, even in 6 years, it had gone up in value tremendously. We were able to take out a home equity line. So we spent no money, not out of our checking account or a bank account.
Out of the checkbook. You were like, hey, we just tapped what it
It was a home equity line of credit that we then refinanced into a fixed rate mortgage later, and never spent a cent on it, and got my dream kitchen that I walk into and I love.
Yeah.
And will hopefully sell much better too.
Yeah, for sure. So you've been covering housing through the boom, the bust, everything in between. What do homeowners that come out ahead have in common?
I think it's a lot of the stuff I already said. It's just not getting too emotional when you're buying.
Yeah.
I think it's being financially responsible, understanding your limitations, and not just understanding them, but accepting them. There are some people who are just like, I want, and I will put myself into debt to do it, way more than I should.
Right.
I think homeowners who come out ahead are more conservative. Look, I am deeply conservative. I covered the boom to bust of, as I said, the subprime mortgage crisis, and then the great foreclosure crisis. There were thousands and thousands of distressed homes, and people always say to me, well, did you buy a bunch of rental homes? Did you invest in the houses because they were so cheap? Did you go to, and I went to the foreclosure auctions with cameras, and we walked in with door kickers with investors who had bought the homes, and they literally call them door kickers. They buy the house, but the house, there's no keys because it's been foreclosed on.
Come on in.
So they come in and they break into the house, and they never know what they're going to find. And that was why it was really fun. So we actually did that live on, which was,
oh, wow.
I don't know what possessed me to say, hey, let's do this live with the door kicker, because there were bats inside, and they literally flew out at us as we were live on TV. And it'd be very close to my first expletive on TV, but it did not happen. Okay.
It might have been mine.
Yeah. But I think the people who come out ahead, it's not that they're not ambitious in their purchasing. It's that they just need to be smart and take the emotion out of it.
So let's circle back, all the way back to, there aren't enough houses. So how do we see that change? Like, how does that change?
That is an extraordinarily complicated political, financial question. So housing starts, building permits were actually down in April. We just got those numbers out. They're down year over year. Builders react to interest rates. They react to consumer sentiment. They also react to inflation. The cost of land, labor, materials makes it much harder for them to pencil affordable housing. There's a housing bill that's, saying that investors can no longer buy single family homes to rent. And there was a big controversial part of that because a lot of investors, the big institutionals, that is those who own more than 350 homes, names like American Homes for Rent, Invitation Homes, Pretium, they have been building homes for rent. And part of that bill said, well, if you're buying build for rent homes or building the homes yourself, you have to divest them in 7 years. Well, that was a huge no to the industry, and it was taken out of the House bill. Now it's going back to the Senate. I mean, I don't know when this is going to stream. It may all be worked out, but the whole idea is that you want homes to be built, no matter how you get them, whether it's big investors building them, whether it's public home builders building them, whether it's smaller private locals building them. But the economics of home buildings right now is very rough, very rough. Most of the, construction labor force is immigrant labor. So you have that working against you. Land costs are higher. Regulation is higher. Now, the administration is working to ease some regulations, but regulations by and large for home builders are state to state, city to city, town to town. Builders will tell you that the regulatory costs that go into each home can be as much as 20% of the cost of the house. So it's just, again, inflation when you now have the war and you have rising gas prices. Well, how does that factor into home building? Home building is done by machinery, it's people getting to the job site, it's the trucks, it's it's all the equipment needed to do that. And then you have tariffs on top of that. And I can't even get into which tariffs are on or off because every day it's different. It's hard to follow. Lumber, steel, aluminum, piping, drywall had tariffs on it. I can't tell you if they're still there or not or what the moratorium, they've been changing so much. But it is all those costs that are making it more and more difficult just to build affordable homes.
So the short answer is it might be a while before we have
one. The short answer is, sorry, I got no answer.
We might be living in this weird phase a while longer.
It's odd because a lot of, we go by these certain metrics of supply and demand and where prices should be. But who would have thought that we'd have a pandemic and mortgage rates would go down to below 3% and that would cause this massive run on housing. But at the same time, we're still coming off of this epic housing crash that we'd never seen since the Great Depression. So when I say it's weird, that's just my really boring word for saying that, we've never seen a lot of these dynamics and all of them happening, kind of in a 10 to 15 year period.
Right. Oh, this has been interesting. This has been great. Diana, I appreciate this.
It was so nice to meet you.
Here's what I'm taking away from my conversation with Diana. You're not just buying the house, you're buying the monthly payment. So it's important to know that number before you walk into a single open house. The reality is rates aren't going back to 3% anytime soon. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment, Be realistic about what you can afford and what makes sense right now. And here's the part I keep thinking about. Diana walked into a house with newspapers on the floor and a less than ideal kitchen. It was a real mess, but it had no offers and had just been sitting on the market. So she bought it because she saw that bay window and that exposed brick, and she knew what she was actually buying. And in just 10 months later, she sold it for $100,000 more. The point being, don't let an outdated kitchen scare you away. Finishes, fixtures, and paint can all change, but the bones stay, and that's what you're actually buying. Thanks for watching, and if you liked the episode, please subscribe. Also, if you know someone who's trying to figure out this weird market, share this episode. This is Angie Hicks with Own It, and I'll see you next time.